Warning. Warning number 23.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Kadzilla, and this is where I talk about horror and all things horrifying. To save my friends from my constant info dumping. So remember the one watch equals one free friend. Today I am talking about, I'm talking about Stephen King again. I was all set up and planned to do a little video essay deep dive on the 1980s video nasty controversy, but I have since seen Francis Lawrence's The Long Walk adaptation. I am a long-time lover of Stephen King's works and their various cinematic adaptations, which also means I am simultaneously a long-time hater. That's how interests work for me, unfortunately. The sweet spot for my brain is like media that is very vast and very impactful for me personally, but also very objectively flawed, so I can just pick it apart forever and ever and ever. However, the other week I was sat for the Long Walk movie, and I have in fact been sat for the Long Walk since like, I think it was 2019 when it was still a, or 2018 maybe, when it was still in development as an Andre Overdal movie. And it has in fact been lurking around in development literally since 1988, I believe, when George Romero, the esteemed director of like the Living Dead movies, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Living Dead, the Dead guy. Oh, that's not okay. Rest in peace, Mr. Romero. Yeah, that was when he was set to film it. Would have been so very cool, but so very different as a movie to the one we got. I believe Frank Darabont of Shawshank Redemption and Green Mile fame was also attached to it at one point. Again, amazing, but very different potential. Alas, in a most bizarre, most stunning turn of events, I have nothing bad to say about the movie that we did get. I like this movie, guys. In fact, it's safe to say I loved this movie. I think everyone kind of loved this movie. It's really making waves, and specifically I'm seeing a lot of people like my age and younger kind of inspired to get into the wider Kingverse because of it. You know, that's how you know it's a banger, when it starts carrying the torch forward. And while obsessively replaying in my mind all the things about it that I really love, it got me thinking about King adaptations in general and all those like rare mystical ingredients that add up to a truly good one. So you're in for a kind of crash course, a kind of a lecture about the fabled perfect Stephen King adaptation. What's the science behind it? With lots of gushing about the new Long Walk movie along the way, obligatory. So lace up your inappropriate footwear, refill your canteen, and for the love of God, hold your shit. And let's get into it. So the first thing I think you should upcoming director of the newest Stephen King adaptation, the first thing I think you should prioritize is casting. In my opinion, Stephen King's greatest strength as a writer is not his tension and his scares. It's not even his world building, but it is his character work. His characters are so perfectly eccentric and like homely in a way that you can usually tell from their first couple of lines that they are truly Kingian to their core. Book accurate casting has its place, especially when you can tell like a production really rode for that specifically rather than just grabbing as many big names as they could. Like in The Long Walk, Cooper Hoffman is in fairness kind of the biggest name in this movie, apart from Mark Hamill, although technically not because he's playing a lesser role, but he's technically the biggest. But he is so completely, perfectly embodying the character of Ray Garrity from The Page that it still feels really thoughtful, as opposed to like Jacob Elordi or something. Timothy Chalamet, Margot Robbie as Ray Garrity. He doesn't look polished at all. He looks very like a real person, but he's so all-American looking, and he's kind of baby-faced but kind of handsome in a vintagey kind of way. He's a nepo baby, but I have never seen anyone more heroic little white boy in a Stephen King story coded than him in my life. So like, of course he had to be here, and he did amazing. And you know, there have been plenty of big flashy names in King adaptations over the years that still feel as though they were casted with care and really work as a result. Christopher Walken as Johnny Smith in The Dead Zone 1983 comes to mind, for example. The man is a sci-fi icon, but I would still have him over anyone else as this character. Johnny is a guy that falls into a very long and in a lot of ways medically miraculous coma, and then wakes up with the ability to tell the future or like gain supernatural insight into stuff when he touches people and things. Despite this power though, he's a very fragile and sort of geeky dude. He's an English teacher whose students nickname him Frankenstein because he's always looming around all hunched over and spooky-eyed. He is so highly empathetic despite his slight strangeness though.
The ice is gonna break!
He's a pretty tragic character who feels very earnest and human in spite of his supernatural trajectory. And is that not just perfectly made for Christopher Walken? He brings such a charm to that role and is precisely what you imagine when you're reading the book. Another example is Nancy Allen in Brian De Palma's Carrie, playing the final boss of all mean high school girls, Chris Hodgkinson. Very iconic actress. She's a De Palma regular who's always kind of floating around his movies. So her being there was always a given, an obvious safe choice, but her casting just works way too much for that to ever matter. The ends justify the means. Also, Keith Gordon as Arnie and Christine, Bonnie Bedelia as Polly in Needful Things. She was Susan in Salem's Lot too, but she's much more Polly. Fred Gwynne as Judd in Pet Sematary. Need I say more? Need I say more? I will still say though, the greatest, most book accurate casting of all time, in my opinion, is Kathy Bates as Annie Wilkes in Misery. And she was kind of technically a semi-unknown actress at that time. Very much just a theatre actress before that. And she's talked a lot about having a lot of doors closed in her face with regards to her career before Misery. Because she didn't really fit the mold of like young, airbrushed, skinny, hot 80s babe. If you don't think Kathy Bates is the hottest babe in the world, you're a fucking freak. But the role of Annie really was just like made for her. And that was very much recognized by the world and the Academy. She won an Oscar for it. She looks so perfectly at home in Annie's like weird kind of Mormon sleigh costumes. She's so sweet and unassuming and oddly kind of childlike at the exact same time as being the most viciously terrifying little menace. Nobody in this universe other than Kathy Bates could have brought this role and honestly this whole story to life, and I am forever grateful as fuck that they didn't just go for whoever was bringing in like the biggest bucks at the time. And she fucking did it again for Dolores Claiborne. Please read and watch that if you haven't. It is an underrated masterpiece. It's so very good. You guys will love it. Sometimes things can be truly legendary, however, not just great but legendary, when a director makes the bold choice to go with someone a little bit less book accurate. Not just because they've misunderstood the text or they just don't really gaff. I mean when someone is brave enough to like really trust their vision and risk getting pitchforked by a gazillion different 40-year-old Reddit men and take that character off the page and into a new, maybe slightly unexpected direction. Like what The Long Walk did with the character of Pete McVries was so good. It was so inspired. It was delicious. In the book, McVries was very much like the obligatory king boy bestie role, blessed with greater wisdom and world weariness than our main character, and so offering him a little insight, helping him along on his journey. He and Garrity's friendship and arc as a pair very much mirrors Gordy and Chris's from Stand By Me, for example. His main novel backstory as to why he's such a hardened old soul is because he had a really awful relationship with his ex-girlfriend who kind of outshone him. She outgrew him and considered herself better and classier than his poor working class self. Classic woman. That's also the reason for the scar on his face, because he got in a fight with her about it and she whacked him with a letter opener. I found this gave him a low-key kind of incel-y quality that just kind of ruined things for me, and in general he had quite a harsh edge to him. I feel like David Johnson must have been one of those castings where like the dude was so charismatic and likable that the character just unconsciously kind of melded into that a little bit, you know, like Joe Keery in Stranger Things kind of vibe. He still has had a hard life in the movie. I believe they go with the backstory that he was like homeless for a little bit, I think. But this just turns him into a bona fide little Andy Dufresne. It makes him all the more hopeful and positive, often waxing lyrical about how much he loves life and tries his hardest to see the good in everything because of his experiences. And the gentle brotherly warmth he has interacting with Garrity makes you feel those weepy Stephen King friendship, Jesus does anyone type emotions so strongly. It translates so much better and carries that theme of friendship to screen so much better, I believe, than like just a copy and paste of book McVrees ever would. He's still a little brash and playfully kind of a dickhead at times, but he's just such a charmer. I want to pinch his little cheeks. Smaller characters in The Long Walk like Stebbins and Gary Barkovich were also portrayed a little bit differently, but in this just brilliant magical way where they somehow felt more like the book than the book itself. Stebbins was always kind of the mystery intrigue character in the book. He always walks at the back of the group, never divulges much or shows much emotion. Looks like he'd be weak and would dip out of the walk early, but never does. In the movie, his character is sort of neatened up a little bit, and he's portrayed much more as the straight-laced, ass-kissing army kid, you know? Still a dark horse that distances himself from the others, but he's more movie-friendly and unique from the other characters we meet. Barkovich is the book's closest thing to a human antagonist, because he's just a little bitch. He's always starting fights and provoking everyone, which in a scenario where staying calm, focused, and on track is key, obviously has fatal effects. When I first saw Charlie Plummer got cast in this role, I really didn't see it. The character in the book is like described as really short, hopping and buzzing around like a little fly. He's got dark hair and dark eyes. I was basically just picturing little Jack Dylan Grazer the whole time I was reading. Plummer usually plays more like Stebbins coded characters, if anything, like a pale looming kind of weirdo as opposed to foul-mouthed firecracker, and yet he might have been the standout in the film for me. Actually, he brought so much vulnerability to the character of Barkovich, who at the end of the day always was just acting out because he was terrified of not fitting in and being rejected, and as we see, regrets it bitterly when he learns he's gonna have to die friendless. He is such an open wound here. Like, he adds this little quirk of slapping himself in the face after acting out and being shitty, which I thought was so interesting and so teenage. It endeared me to him greatly. And honestly, now I think about it, all the King castings that really stick with me the most are actually the ones that aren't afraid to shake it up a little bit. The ones that out King Stephen King himself and make these characters pop more than ever. Sophia Lillis as Bev, not Pennywise the clown, in It is definitely the biggest one for me, I think. I met Sophia Lillis, she was very lovely, and I would show you the picture of us together, but like I'm hugging her so insanely awkwardly, like it's my prom picture in the photo that I can't fucking do it. But I got her autograph. Beverly Marsh is the only girl in the Losers Club. It's a group of like brave, nerdy protagonists, and so all the boys in the group are at least a little bit in love with her. In the book, we are told time and time again that Bev is extraordinarily beautiful but sad because her home life is horrific and her family's very poor and such. Honestly, her being poor is kind of as unconventional as Bev gets. Like, other than that, she is kind of perfect. In It 2017, however, this portrayal is just electric. Director Andy Muschietti had to fight for Sophia Lillis to be able to keep her short pixie cut and a tomboyish little scamp vibe in this movie. I know some people kind of clown on this film, no pun intended, but they clown on the film's attempts to kind of make her a girl boss, make her not like other girls, but I don't know, man. I think it works beautifully in this story all about being an outcast. The unique, like, spiky vibe it gives her actually makes way more sense in my opinion as to how all these dweeby little boys are just so taken with her, as opposed to sweet, polite, pretty little Bev in It 1990, for example. As much as I do love Emily Perkins, that Bev just isn't my fave. Shelley Duvall's portrayal of Wendy Torrance in Kubrick's The Shining is another all-timer, one of the most iconic performances in horror still to this day. Could not be further from the blonde, model, beautiful, and mostly kind of unruffled by everything Wendy in the book, to the point where it pissed Stephen King himself off, but it delighted Catzilla to no end, let me tell you. If you want to hear me talk about that for now, then go watch my hour-long Shining video essay. Her gorgeously unique extraterrestrial kind of beauty made Wendy stand out so much, and I don't think the fragility she played her with was under-feminist, as some may say, at all. Everything about her worked great with like the fraught, miserable, uncanny atmosphere of the Overlook Hotel. So my next category is heeding the time period is key to good King adaptation. And yes, heeding, the best word for it. Because again, I don't mean just going with what's on the page. With classic King stories mostly being written in the 70s and 80s, obviously nostalgia is a big thing in these stories. It plays into it a lot. So preferably do actually go with what's on the page, but not if you're gonna fumble the fuck out of it. Don't try and hide behind it. Don't be Gary Doberman's reboot of Salem's Lot. It's the most Netflixified, Instagram filtered nostalgia bait take on the 1970s. It's very obvious that the film is just trying to ride on that and hope that makes it automatically cozy and fond feeling for the viewer instead of putting any effort or thought into it. The newer It movies did a kind of coy little play with the book accurate time period conundrum, and they moved that story's dual timelines of the 50s and the 80s to the 80s and the 10s. So the characters are 80s kids in the first movie and are grown-ups in the present day for chapter 2. That was a very smart choice financially. It came out just when Stranger Things was peaking, and in general it was the 80s revival, kids on bikes fest for all media everywhere. In terms of actually benefiting the story, however, I would say that I honestly really love it as well. I know a lot of people don't. In general, I really actually just love the whole 80s kids on bikes craze. It makes my little retronaut heart happy. I don't even give a shit. Again, King is heavily associated with the 1980s because even though a lot of his classic works are usually set around the 50s, because that's when he grew up, the 80s was when they came out. The actual banger first time adaptations of all his stuff coming out, and people fell in love with these stories worldwide. In 2017, it was also the first like major release King adaptation that had come out for a really long time at that point. It was a real landmark in the third wave King fandom, and so it just felt right that it was all wrapped up in like the warmth and summery fun of the mid 80s. It was the perfect way to re-immerse modern audiences into that whole Kingian world. The only part of its updated timelines I run into issues with is the modern half. I wish there was some way to have them both like magically set in the 80s. They could definitely have been more like egregious with it though, whipping out Google and iPhones and stuff. That their release was not that. There's a real obsession amongst directors that get their hands on King IP to modernize it. They really think that's what's gonna like make it stand out at the box office. They think it's like suddenly justified to reboot the same thing over and over again as long as it's like getting moderner each time. Mike Flanagan's Carrie. I also have a whole video to that if you want to join in the bitching sesh. When in truth it is justified enough on its own to reboot the same thing if you have passion, if your love and your personal unique interpretation of it is big and beautiful enough to just demand to be seen. That is enough. Every single adaptation of Carrie actually has done this with the timelines for that matter. Every single installment gets more and more modern. It updates every time. Carrie is viewed as a kind of timeless fable about bullying and child abuse, which I think is fair, but everyone's itching to show how it still works so well for every generation, as if timelessness doesn't literally imply it doesn't ever need to be updated. The story in its own raw right should still ring true, but whatever. I think modernization hurt the Pet Sematary reboot as well. Something just felt way too sleek and unoffensive about it. And of course, the renownedly horrible 2022 Firestarter. Although I think we all know an original 70s timeframe could not have saved that fucking thing. The Long Walk does a kind of interesting thing with its time period and just kind of doesn't have one. The Lion does not concern itself with establishing a time period. This is very much like a dystopian piece, so even in the book there are key historical differences between the real 1970s and like the Long Walk verse 1970s. Like for example, they casually refer to Germany having won World War II and stuff, and I think the movie elevated that even more. It has a kind of pseudo 70s vibe to it, just from the costumes and some of the language used. And at one point we see a dude reading this like old-timey pulpy porno mag, but there's also lots of high-tech cameras broadcasting the whole walk, and in general the military walk supervisor people have a lot of high-tech stuff on them. So that could either be a 70s that's super advanced because of maybe different things that have happened in that universe, or it could be a present day that is super behind and old-fashioned in a lot of ways. You know, we're told there's mass poverty going on, for example, or it could just be some alternate universe altogether. We're not even told it's specifically in like Maine either. It's just completely stripped back to being this liminal, timeless road world, and it works beautifully. It's not too on the nose. It's got a hint of nostalgia to spice it up where needed. It's open to interpretation. Just, yeah, banger job. My next point is to not be afraid. Be not afraid to change the fucking plot. I fear the majority of my points here circle back to like, guys, you can do something interesting with this. Because guys, you can do something interesting with this. You can actually do that. I think fan service has become such a given across all media now, and that is just such an issue. Like, there's such huge demand that must not be denied now, that book fans have to be absolutely satisfied that it was just like the book, or that it was just as good as the book, which literally isn't possible in my opinion, because they are two very different mediums. But honestly, like a passionless rote copy just of what's written into the book straight into a screenplay is honestly sometimes so much more of a letdown than something that shakes it up a little bit. That is one of the many reasons why Mick Garris's 1997 Shining is such a wet fart of an adaptation to me. It's so preoccupied with being exactly faithful to every word of the book, exactly mirroring everything Stephen King intended and strictly nothing else after his Stanley Kubrick-induced mental breakdown, and brings absolutely no magic or menace to the story as a result. Not to mention some of the stuff in that book is just way too advanced and would need way too much money for the movie to ever portray in a way that doesn't look like dog shit. Mainly the come-to-life hedge animals and Tony, that guy. It 1990 is a really precious little adaptation to me, and I'm so glad that it exists. But where does it fall flat, you might ask? Trying to adapt Pennywise's true final form, of course, exactly as it is in the book. Exactly what it says in the book about the giant cosmic spider, despite having certainly not the budget to do that. Yeah, that giant spider scene at the end of the miniseries is almost universally hated at this point. And it could have so easily been more effectively reworked. They could have just leaned into the cosmic horror and copped out with it being like a giant orb or never really shown on screen or something, and it would have been miles better. I already mentioned what an iconic and brilliant director George Romero is, but his adaptation of The Dark Half? So vanilla. And again, it's just a visual equivalent of the book. Apart from De Lesseps being changed into a quirky old woman instead of a dude in the movie. Now, that was actually a slave. As a filmmaker, I think it's your God-given right to play with the source material a little bit. In fact, I think it's the mark of an adaptation job well done, to tweak and improve on little things in a way that still oozes with all the good stuff of the source material. The Long Walk is a great exercise in this, as it has a good few changes, namely the ending, which I'm not going to go there, but just know it's completely different and much better. IMO. The important thing here is that it finds the theme of the book and sticks to that religiously. It brings it out nice and strongly. And if it's clear that the screenwriter has totally understood the theme of the book and stuck to that, then they are golden. They can do no wrong. The key themes of this are friendship and war. It's very easy to see how the story about young vulnerable boys going off to their deaths willingly due to some vague promise of glory that they can't really comprehend is about war. Namely, the Vietnam War is what Stephen King was drawing on when he wrote this. And their friendship in the face of doom and violence kind of all comes hand in hand with that. I always mind a lot of meaning about masculinity from this book as well. I feel like I always say that, but I really do find explorations of masculinity, especially like youthful masculinity, so fascinating because it's so brutal and strange to me, especially from King. I think he has some very interesting things to say about all of that. Like, the road itself is manhood and the idea of becoming a real man, and these sweet clueless boys just kind of have to see it through. They just kind of have to, for reasons they can't put into words, and they're terrified and they want to cling to each other, but they can't because it's every man for himself, and you have to shove anyone under the bus at the drop of a hat to survive. And it's safe to say the movie taps into those themes very, very well. It's obvious that they were heard loud and clear, you know. All in all though, I'll say it was pretty faithful to the book in every way it needed to be, especially considering this whole thing all takes place on one walk across one long road in one guy's head, which is something that in the wrong hands could have translated pretty poorly to screen. I thought there would be a lot of relying on flashbacks and things like that, but no, it was... I think it follows in the footsteps really well of other adaptations that know when to change shit and have the confidence in their own vision to do so, like Dolores Claiborne and Misery, for example. Dolores Claiborne, the book, is all in the format of Dolores herself's statement to the police. It's like a huge long speech that's pretty much entirely flashbacks. And Misery obviously all takes place in the same bed as the car crash wounded Paul Sheldon is trapped there at the mercy of his slightly evil caregiver, Annie Wilkes. Their film counterparts both add new characters to add a little bit of visual variety for their viewers and to move the story along a little more externally rather than just inside the characters' heads, or at least Dolores Claiborne kind of repurposes characters. That takes the character of Dolores's daughter, Selena, who we only really hear about through recounted childhood stories in the book, and it makes her a lead, helping her mum put her defense for the police together instead of just cutting straight to the statement. It allows us to squeeze so much more juice out of the theme of mother and daughter relationships that was laid out in the book, and it also lets us have Jennifer Jason Leigh serving harder than anyone has ever served, ever. Like, oh my god, queen. Christine, 1983, I think has to be the best instance of this ever. I truly think it is better than the book, and that's insane. That is a crazy thing for me to say. John Carpenter so definitely cuts out all the stuff that really drags this book down and gets right to the heart of the keen glory. The Christine lore itself gets really murky in the novel. Obviously it's the evil car book, but King really doesn't know whether she's an inherently evil car or a possessed car or a cursed car, and whether our leading man Arnie is having his life torn apart by Christine herself or the ghost of her cruel old owner. Carpenter does away with all of that though and really lets the diva herself shine. She's bad to the bone in this movie, and that's all we really need to know. It keeps Arnie's arc with her nice and simple, and the themes of friendship growing apart, loss of innocence, and yes, again, toxic masculinity come through tenfold. It's just so much lighter and breezier and so much more exciting. The Mist 2007 has one of the most iconic changes to its source material of all time in its ending, and I will spoil that because it came out 18 years ago. You've had a whole education system to watch that shit by now. The short story ends on an ambiguous and vaguely hopeful note, with the characters still being stuck in the titular mist that's fallen all over the place, but with plans in place to keep exploring, keep trying to find help. The movie sees the characters conclude they will probably never be able to find help in this monster-infested mist, and so choosing suicide, with the lead, David, shooting all his fellow survivors, including his little son, before he can kill himself. However, the mist literally at that second starts to clear and military help can be seen on the horizon. So brutal, and it really amplifies the kind of gritty, lost fight for survival atmosphere of the original short story in a way that Stephen King himself actually said he prefers. Of course, big fundamental changes to the plot in a King adaptation can go horribly wrong. The sky is blue. When you're making too many changes that are too willy-nilly, you're losing sight of maintaining the book's integrity and following its core kind of messaging. The infamous 1992 Lawnmower Man doesn't even do fan fiction. It literally just takes the IP and makes a whole ass different story, to the point where it ran into some legal troubles pretty quickly. The Lawnmower Man is a short story in Night Shift about this strange man who may or may not be an entity related to the god Pan, and who also mows lawns. Only he mows them with his mouth, eating the grass, while fully naked and with little cloven hooves on his feet. A lot of people laugh at that story, which I suppose is fair, but I always found it to be quite genuinely unnerving little yarn that has a lot of fun with that stereotypical metaphor of the lawn as like social status and suburbia. Brett Leonard's film, however, turns it into like a sci-fi action situation about an intellectually disabled lawnmower man being scientifically experimented on in order to become this cyber superhuman action hero. Like, okay. Modern reboots kind of almost always seem to run into the changing shit too much issue. And I think it's because they're like stumbling over the fact that like Stephen King has been done time and time again by now, right? It's been permanent open season on his body of work for quick cash grab horror flick. There's this pressure to like make it different for some reason. Pair that with the fact that filmmakers are trying to pick from his like 2 pieces of work that haven't been adapted before by now, so they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel with very short, simple stories that will need a lot of stretching and warping to ever work as like a moving image adaptation at all. Rob Savage's The Boogeyman, for example, takes the very simple concept of a man whose kids keep dying. He's lost, I think, 3 kids already when we meet him, and each death it becomes clearer and clearer that a boogeyman is somehow involved, kind of haunting him. The story comes to us in the form of this man seeing a therapist and venting it all out. It's honestly terrifying and quite subtle. The movie, for some reason, switches the story to be about the therapist and the new additions of his daughters, using the boogeyman as a grief metaphor. Surprise, surprise. Because the therapist recently lost his own wife. Way too big of a veering off from the plot. It lacks a lot, if not all, of the Kingian warmth required for an adaptation. And I always saw the boogeyman as like a metaphor for the original father character's own self-sabotage, his temper and his failings to ever be a good loving dad. So theme lost. Same goes for the monkey that just came out this year, about the toy monkey that will randomly clap its little cymbals, and every time it does so, somebody dies. Oz Perkins has spoken a lot about how he teased out his own weird feelings about death and its randomness in this film. He's someone who famously lost his mum to 9/11 and his dad to the AIDS crisis, so he's obviously been touched by that in a super unique and big way. I obviously respect that, but I don't know. This is just such a wildly different story to the original source. It takes the concept of 2 brothers who possess this evil monkey toy and tries to do a kind of ironic splatter comedy from there. Let it be known, I don't actually really like the original short story very much. I think it's pretty mid. So the fact this feels a lot like its own thing doesn't offend me per se, but you know, it feels like its own thing. Just drop the IP. Stop trying to make it work. Honestly, choosing the right format is honestly like a kind of mini point in its own right. I'm sick and tired of meager little micro penis short stories being adapted into feature films with runtimes of upwards of 90 minutes. Please, God, just give me a Shudder series that is just like Night Shift and Skeleton Crew with 20-minute episodes for each. Please just give me that instead. And when I say give me, I mean give me the rights, let me do it. Like Louis Teague's Cat's Eye, for example. Perfect formatted anthology horror with 3 short stories adapted, fits like a glove. I'm also sick and tired of giant epic tomes being adapted into films. To the fact that the recent It reboot was not a series with 2 seasons for each timeline makes me feel like the guy trying to sleep with his head on fire gif always. Every night. They'll sometimes try to like appease a little bit by making them mini-series. So like It, 1990, Salem's Lot, The Stand, Tommyknockers, but that's still pretty squashed and unsatisfying for these big boys. King's novellas always work really deliciously for feature films though, like Stand By Me and Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. I think a Stephen King novella is the exact equivalent to like a nice, neat and tidy regular guy film. My next point is to choose your director carefully. Choose very wisely who is at the helm of these things. Stephen King adaptations will quite often be offered out on like a first come first serve basis nowadays, or like a biggest bucks first serve basis, and it's very clear to see how like who it ends up going to can really make or break it as an adaptation. Mike Flanagan and Frank Darabont are very widely considered trustworthy guys when it comes to King. People often call Flanagan like the new Darabont. They both often pull passages like directly from the text and chuck them straight into characters' mouths. And they both excel at the more sentimental, character-heavy works that make you cry. You know, I wouldn't be giving these guys any Buckman books or like Dreamcatcher to adapt. Back in the 80s, there was this like Stephen King ex-auteurs run where all the greats were just having a crack at Stephen King. I think King works were obviously much more hot off the press. They were much more exclusive and fresh, so only the likes of like John Carpenter, Rob Reiner, David Cronenberg were allowed on the scene. I desperately wish there were more Carpenter ex-King collabs out there. I would say David Cronenberg because he is my favorite director, but I think his lens is just like a smidge too cold to always work with King stuff. Although I will say The Dead Zone is fucking fantastic. Banging job at something King as well. I know he only really directs his own stuff because that's obviously where he's more comfortable, but like it would be a dream. The director of The Long Walk, Francis Lawrence, and the screenwriter J.T. Molnar obviously are not like renowned for pumping out loads of Stephen King adaptations, nor are they like major film auteurs per se, but they are both heavy hitters in the dystopian and horror genres respectively, which I think marries up very nicely for this specific piece. Francis Lawrence does the Hunger Games movies. I'm not a massive fan of those. I'm just not much of a hungry guy, but they very much share the core DNA with The Long Walk and being about like children sent off by a broken, hopeless world to essentially die. J.T. Molnar recently did that really fucked up and violent little movie Strange Darling that popped off last year. I think Molnar evens out any of Lawrence's potential PG-13ness, and Lawrence keeps Molnar still warm and nostalgic. All around feels very intentional, good choices, not just whoever snapped that shit up first. I think I actually like that neither of these guys are like big offenders. Like big names in the King world, because I do find sometimes when the same people keep getting handed King stuff over and over again, it can get a little bit dick sucky. Mick Garris was definitely guilty of this in the 90s. He really was King's like little best bud, and I think the eagerness to please and almost kind of worship of him comes across and harms those films quite a bit. I fear unfortunately that is what started to happen a tad with George Romero towards the end. He was just way too bestied up with King. I fear Mike Flanagan might be headed this way a little bit too, especially after seeing Life of Chuck recently. That movie was just one big look at how beautiful it all is. Are you impressed? Are you crying? And it just, I don't know, the fanboyism went too far and it was too self-aware. Last point is simple, but it is imperative. So listen up. This will be the subject of your next homework assignment. So listen up, Year 9. But you simply must go brutal. Okay, these are horror novels. They're disturbing, they're bleak, they're strange, they're gory. You cannot clip her beautiful wings by just adding a load of cutaways and general PG vibes. I'm looking at you, Miss It 2017. Get my ears all perked up with that storm drain arm rippage scene and then never really going hard on the physical threat ever again. Give me Patrick Hockstadter's fridge full of dead dogs and shit. Actually, don't, because I don't know that Andy Machete could handle that, tonally speaking. I know Stephen King is kind of wrapped up in the whole Stranger Things hype, but this stuff is not for kids and it should not be treated as such. I love kid horror. I love Goosebumps, Scooby-Doo, Are You Afraid of the Dark, all of that, but this is not that. Give me Misery, you know? Give me Frank Dodd killing himself by deep-throating a pair of scissors in The Dead Zone. Give me Jessie Burlingame degloving herself to get off that damn bed in Gerald's Game. The Long Walk did amazingly with this and impressed me so much. As I mentioned, it was directed by Mr. Hunger Games, so I did have some like very faint concerns that it would be a little bit tame, a little bit Disney, but the absolute misery and blood and guts of this story are out in their full glory throughout. We've got snapped ankles still getting walked on legs getting run over, inside spewing out all over the place. We've even got CGI poo explosion. It's handled in a way that doesn't feel cheap either. Like, it's all given the gravity it's due. And so that is class dismissed. Well done. You have passed with flying colors and you have the rights. Then to do a Stephen King adaptation, so make me proud. I don't know what movie you're adapting in this scenario. Probably fucking Carrie again. Real talk though, if you guys could get your hands on any one of his stories to adapt, which one would it be? Me and my best friend actually have a full detailed plan of a 2-series adaptation of it, every single scene, and I actually started writing the screenplay already, just so you know what kind of awesome friendship experience I have to offer. And I have always said that I personally believe in myself that I could make a really scary little movie of Grammar from Skeleton Crew. It's actually my favorite Stephen King short story ever. Until the next video, what are you watching? What have you been reading? I am currently reading a non-fiction book that just came out called Ghosted, A History of Ghost Hunting and Why We Keep Looking by Alice Vernon. I thought that was a very fun little October reading situation. The things I've been watching, I have been watching Goosebumps, the original 90s series, in the mornings on YouTube. It's free on YouTube, full episode, so please join me, because again, it's October, baby. We have to lock in. Bye!